very pertinent topic. The Cutting Through Chaos series done by Lewis Partners Supply Chain Labs is a forum intended to discuss the how-to components of whatever that needs to get done for entrepreneurs to come out of this crisis in a better position than they would otherwise be. We've had 3 webinars so far, and there are a bunch of other topics that have been suggested by founders, which we will cover over the course of these things. One of the topics, and this is the one that is, significantly important for entrepreneurs as well, because as they realize, the first couple of sessions, and I think about the month and a half, has gone in various conversations and discussions in terms of understanding what the impact would be and where things would be. And I think this particular session is for entrepreneurs to understand, okay, there is going to be some impact on my business. Some of that will be significant. Some of that will be something that I can deal with. How do I actually deal with these kinds of things? Because lots of these younger entrepreneurs have had no experience in going through, certainly not the downturns like the one that we see right now, but several of them may not even have seen any significant business cycles that required them to rejig their business. And this conversation today is for individuals to understand what specifically they should be doing in different contexts or different circumstances that may be relevant in their context. And to keep in the spirit of the theme of these webinars done by Supply Chain Labs, the intent is to make it very, to provide people actionable insights from our own experience. And ladies and gentlemen, for this, we have a very stellar panel. People who have built large businesses, who have run large businesses at global scales, and certainly who over the last 2 or 3 or 4 decades in some cases have seen significant ups and downs and have navigated their companies through those challenging times. And certainly they have, as mentors and as investors also, and as advisors to several companies, have also been privy to the way companies navigate or should navigate, or some of the mistakes that some of the companies may have made in navigating, and their perspectives and insights into this is going to be very useful. So with that, gentlemen, if I may request each one of you to give a very brief introduction of yourself, and if I may request Ashutosh, Garg, to kindly start, please.
Hey, thank you, Project. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Ashutosh, Mayank, and Loomis for inviting me. Quick introduction. I'm an MBA from the 79 batch of Jamnalal Bajaj. Joined ITC when I was 21 and a half, spent 17 years with ITC. Left in 96, I was managing director of their entire international operations, moved into aerospace, spent 8 years running Asia, head of Martin and the head of Asia for Hughes, and then became an entrepreneur, founded Guardian Pharmacy, grew it from a single store into India's second chain, and then sold the whole business 3 years ago. I'm an executive coach, basically CEOs. I'm an author, and I do all kinds of other fun stuff. Project, you're on mute.
Project, you're on mute.
Sorry, I didn't realize. Suman, may I request you to kindly go next, and then Girish, and then Sreevathsa, please.
Sure.
And just following the sequence that I see on the screen, no particular order.
Hi, Suman. I currently I advise businesses, and I'm sit on boards of a few companies. A couple of them are listed companies. I also do advisory across a couple of 3 continents, literally. I have an advisory that I do in Europe, where I also work with some social enterprises. I work and advise with companies in India, and I work and advise companies in Far East. So it kind of gives me, at this point of time, the perspective of what's happening in the various parts of the world. I was a large company guy for 30 years of my life, nearly 30 years of my life. Trained as an engineer, and then having 2 masters in business. Have lived and worked across all livable continents of the world. And right now with a lot of work that I'm doing in Africa, it kind of fulfills my entire spectrum of work that I do. So yeah, I think why I come over here in terms of my discussion points are the perspectives that I see, and as we live today's days, that's coming out from the various countries and the various continents. We'd be happy to share and discuss about it.
And Suman, would it be fair to say that you've got significant experience in dealing with large enterprise clients?
Yes, yes, very large enterprise clients and their supply chains.
Wonderful, and that's the context in which some of the questions and conversations we'll have with them. Girish?
Yeah. Morning, guys. Glad to be here. I run a venture capital fund called Yournest. We are an early stage pre-series A focused fund where we do deep tech investments, primarily focused on the B2B side of the world. I have about 17 companies in the portfolio. Before that, I used to be for many years part of telecom, media, and technology verticals. The perspective I bring today is essentially entrepreneur / founder / startup perspective, and the intent is to walk you through some of the stuff that we are doing within the portfolio to manage the situation and how we see things panning out as we come out from the other end of the tunnel. So that's me.
Wonderful. And Girish, through the conversation, it'll also be good to get some examples of some things that are good to do from experience of younger entrepreneurs, as different from, say, for example, larger companies. But it'll also be nice to hear about some things that did not go well and some of the things that people might want to avoid in this kind of a situation.
Absolutely.
Sreevathsa?
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thanks, Ashutosh and team, for getting me part of this. I'm an engineer by education and then did masters. Started my career with the largest company, electronics company in India, BPL. Went through multiple OEMs and worked also with Tatas, and last with Nokia. 2009, I became an entrepreneur out of real passion, just without knowing anything about startups. Since then, I've been an entrepreneur. I've built my first business, bootstrapped it completely to run about 385 stores across the country. Was everything in a non-sexy world called after-sales service and supply chain. 2015, I founded Servify, and it's been a fun journey until the COVID hit. And I think life is all about 360-degree circle and life and living and learning, I think. So I'm here to share my learnings. It's been good and bad, but I think we're also seeing some opportunities in the adversity. So I'm going to share some of my experiences there. Thank you.
Let's say in 30 seconds, if you can just explain what you do at Servify and the kind of customers you serve, so that will give a context on the kind of conversation people might have.
Sure. So it's 30 seconds. Probably I can go on for 30 hours. I think our biggest challenge also is to explain our business in 30 seconds. But just to explain what we do, if you have heard of Samsung Care Plus, Apple Care, Xiaomi Care, OnePlus Care, these are all the platforms run by us, which means everything after sales service. There was no such platform that existed that brought together everybody in the after sales service, whether it is call center, service center, retailer, trade-in, buyback vendor, insurers, everybody together. And we built that platform to get all those fulfillers on a single platform, but white labeled our platform for the OEM. So customers still trust the brands because they expect service from the brands that they manufacture their products. So we are the one who power some of these platforms. And so through these tough times, I think one of the biggest learnings and the advantages, like I said, opportunity in the adversity, is that our retail and our fulfillment ecosystem has become more and more open, transparent, and our relationships are only becoming stronger because everybody is going through the same phase.
Well, I think as a result of what you do, you also are directly, plugged into the supply chains of some of these companies, and including some of the reverse logistics, a topic that we have really not touched upon so far. So we'll have some conversations with that.
Sure.
Myself, my name is Prabhakar. I call myself an entrepreneurship evangelist, and I'm very, very passionate about promoting entrepreneurship as a career option. I have a mission of being able to hopefully assist and encourage 100,000 people to be entrepreneurs in my lifetime. I run a company called Applyify, where we work with individual startups, helping them improve their chances of success. And we also work with corporates in helping them run some of their accelerator programs and startup innovation programs. Along with Ashutosh, Garg here, we also run a program to help companies come out of this crisis. It's called the Reset Program. We also have on the panel now Ashutosh, Mayank, and Akhil, who drive the supply chain lab initiatives at Loomis Partners. So with that, let's get into the conversation. Friends, I'm going to request each one of you to talk a little bit about what impact you see post this, and how businesses and industries, particularly the ones that you're connected with, are likely to change, either for the better or what opportunities that represent. And as a result of those changes, if there are any consequences, or if there are any implications for supply chain labs or supply chain and logistics companies, that would be good to know. So Ashutosh, if I may request you to start with your view of how the FMCG industry and the entire distribution and supply chain of consumer goods is likely to be impacted as a result of what we see.
Thank you, Project. So, friends, I'm going to talk a little bit about my own learnings. Project, how much time do I have?
I think a good 2 to 3 minutes would be good.
2 to 3 minutes? Perfect, perfect. So, I think the first and most important thing is to go back into history and see what were our learnings from our 2008 recession. I'm not saying that 2020 Corona is similar to what happened of the financial fallout of 2008, but that also brought everything to a halt. And I think some of the things that are going to start happening are that we're going to start refocusing on home. We are going to start thinking of eating out less. We're going to start going out less. We're going to start cutting back on non-essential items. We're going to start looking for more deals. We're going to start trading down, which means more white labels will come into the FMCG space. We're going to start shifting to value retailers or to e-commerce. And in a paper that I just published in the Times of India and my blog, I said that what's going to really happen is that we will all start to categorize everything into 3 categories, which I say necessary, essential, and desirable. Necessary for me to live, essential for services which would be required for me to continue to maintain whatever life I'm used to having. And then the third category, which I think is going to have the biggest challenge, is what is desirable. Is it going to be something that I really need or don't need? And I do mention this several times, and I've spoken about this several times, that whenever we come out of the COVID-19 lockdown, etc., and we try and get back to a normal world, the first question we will ask ourselves all the time is, do I really need this? The do I really need this syndrome is going to start becoming much more pronounced. If you are to start looking at the channels, I've already mentioned there will be a much greater dependence on e-commerce, and very interestingly, the Kirana stores. So FMCG will start to see a significant amount of movement to the Kirana stores, because remember that the big platforms failed us in the last 4.5, 5 weeks. The Kirana store, the ubiquitous Kirana store, has been with us all the time. So much so that the latest Geo Facebook platform is talking about bringing Kirana stores on the platform. And so has Amazon made a similar announcement. People will not return to malls for a while. People will be conscious of social distancing till a virus is found. And I have served for 8 years on the board of the largest vaccine body of the United Nations, and I can say with absolute certainty that a virus is not coming in before the next 18 months. A lot of wishful thinking is going on, but it's not going to happen. So, what's really going to happen is that the expensive goods will see a lower offtake, inventories will be large, and we should start expecting serious discounting. So I'm going to conclude my 2.5 minutes project with only the comment that I just made, that do I really need this syndrome is going to become very, very pronounced.
And Ashutosh,
as we go forward,
what implications would that have on companies that are in the supply chain, warehousing, or logistics space? The incumbents, and do these represent challenges or opportunities for entrepreneurs who may be coming up with technology solutions and optimizing these supply chains?
The good thing about life is that every adversity has a positive situation. So it's a question of how we think about the challenges that we're going to face. Warehouse is going to be full, but the so-called old terminology of just-in-time inventory is going to get very, very critical, because cash flows will be very tight. Money supply is going to be tight unless the government steps in and releases large amounts of money. Industry is crying for much, much larger amounts of working capital. So there will be opportunity for really efficient supply chain companies to be able to move goods at a phenomenal pace. And there will be incredible opportunities for warehousing companies to be able to build their businesses. And of course, the manufacturers will have to try and figure out how to get their products to the consumer much faster.
Interesting that you mentioned just in time, because there's a different point of view that some people had put across, which is saying that given the disruptions that it has caused, rather than depending too much on just in time, people will stock up a lot more on their inventories and raw material requirements. Which of these two options do you hear industry talking about a lot more? Do you think that they will try and optimize just in time, or is it going to be at least for the medium term trying to get?
So without giving names of companies, I mean, I do coach the CEO of a very large engineering company, and he was telling me only 3 days ago that they had imported huge amounts of stock inventory for their equipment from China. Assuming that there are going to be some major stocking problems, and he says now we are stuck with all that stock. We don't know what to do with it. So I do believe that no matter what happens, maybe a short-term aberration can be that people may want to stock up a little extra. And a classical example that I was reading somewhere was this incredible rush to stock toilet paper in the US. And then someone made an estimate to say that if an individual who has stocked up so much toilet paper will probably have to go to the toilet 471 times a day to be able to use up all the stocks that he or she has collected. So I do believe that inventory will always come back to just in time because inventory is cash.
Fair enough. Great. There's one question. I would have normally taken questions at the end of the session, but this is relevant to the conversation. Jatin has asked, how do if you can elaborate a little on how e-commerce companies have failed in these times? And I suspect the question is asked because as entrepreneurs, they always try to look for opportunities in some of the challenges that companies might be facing.
So, I hope there is nobody who will get offended if I take names of e-commerce companies. I live in Gurgaon. I have for the last 3 years been so dependent on the Amazons of the world and the big baskets of the world and the Spencers of the world. And the day the first Janta curfew started, the Janta lockdown started, these companies suddenly lost all their people. And it left me wondering, what happens to this incredible depth of management that all these companies claim to have, and we got access to people, etc. They were just not, and it's 32, 33 days since then. Even today, these big companies have not been able to get their act together, even to deliver. On the other hand, a small startup like a milk basket or a small kirana store, or even individuals who have taken on themselves that you pay them 50 rupees. They've got their motorcycles and they've got their permits and they're going around delivering all over the place. So I think so there will be some serious thinking that will have to happen in the big format brands. Take an example of a Zomato. Zomato is continuously delivering no matter what happens. Forget the licenses. It's a people issue. Some of the big companies have failed in being able to get the people to be able to deliver. Other companies have continued to get the people.
Thanks. No, I think that's helpful, and I think that also represents in some ways some opportunities for startups to come and operate.
So, Project, if I may continue on Ashutosh's point on the opportunities for supply chain, do you think I have a minute, maybe?
Yes, of course. Kindly go ahead.
Sure. So I think coming from that background of supply chain and that industry, I think certainly the KPIs will change. For example, you used to get delivery in 4 hours if you are a Prime member. I don't think 4 hours matters any longer, right? So I think therefore the supply chain, in my view, the redesign of supply chain, everything getting centralized will become now decentralized to a large extent. Of course, not forgetting the cash flow and the inventory issues. So therefore, it's all about game of efficiency and technology. So I believe there'll be a significant shift from centralizing to decentralizing, but with technology and bringing just in time as a concept. But just in time does not mean you order and you get a toy, Sun's toy also delivered in 2 hours. Yeah. You don't need Sun's toy in 2 hours. Maybe you need milk in 2 hours. So I think the definition of essentials will get changed. We are now suddenly in a non-essentials business, if you ask me, because there are no phones getting sold, there are no TVs getting sold. But at the same time, computers are becoming essentials. Tablets are becoming essentials suddenly, which never was an essential earlier. So I think the definitions of essentials and non-essentials will change. Definitions of centralization will change, which may be decentralized, but again centralized at probably in a hub in a city. Maybe there will be virtual inventories. Maybe competitors will come together. So I think it will be a big shift from some of those traditional KPIs, the way we used to manage in especially supply chain. I think that's where big opportunity lies for a lot of the new startups and technology companies. And you gave example of Milk Basket, Anand, right? He is struggling day and out because his objective is to deliver great experience for his customers, and he understands. He has still not become a manager, right? So I think, unfortunately, that's the mindset. Nimbleness will take definitely priority, and that's where, if you remember in our earlier conversation, there is no big and small company any longer. Everybody has to be the same.
So I'm glad, Sreevathsa, that you continued after, this entire thing about just in time. One is, of course, for the consumer side, just in time, while the other is about companies and who are managing the supply chain, raw material, and everything else in a just in time manner. Can you elaborate a little in terms of what this decentralization means? And the reason I'm asking is because, many of the entrepreneurs who are in the supply chain and logistics space, which is the format which is the forum, which is relevant here, are looking for clues on what direction they need to pivot, because most of their enterprise customers might be making pivots and they need to adjust their businesses and models and value propositions accordingly. So this entire concept about, especially in the context of consumer durables, which is the industry that you're most passionately involved with, how do you see this centralization, decentralization, and what does that mean in terms of warehousing, supply chains? Also a related question, which I was going to ask you later on. There is a lot of talk that we hear about companies saying that we'll stop our reliance on China, or at least reduce that significantly, and therefore ensure a lot of that. Is that sentiment being discussed at boardrooms of some of the large companies that we serve? And if so, what implications again does that have on Indian entrepreneurship?
Sorry, I missed you the last probably 5 seconds, so I took off my video. But certainly, I will answer the first question of decentralization and then come to reliance on China. Sure. I think, the centralization meant building one large fulfillment center, like, with due respect to the large companies like Amazon, Flipkart, etc. Everything was getting centralized, right from TV to even a grocery was getting processed at one common big so-called fulfillment center, because the logistics, so most of the supply chain problem was only solved by logistics. If you go to their fulfillment center, probably, and I visited maybe tons of them, it's the highest level of inefficiency you can see. Just by having a conveyor doesn't mean that you bring efficiency, right? So the only efficiency in most of these e-commerce companies also, especially in India, was derived out of logistics efficiency and not really warehousing or other aspects of supply chain. So I think because the logistics today in India is significantly evolved, thanks to the old days of FMCG giants like Unilever or Nokia, which really built that distribution and logistics advancement. So what I mean here is, if you just take an example of, let's say, you have an Amazon, which has probably 7 or 8 fulfillment centers across the country, supplying the whole country, 19,000 odd pin codes, which is where the real business happens. Versus you had the traditional distribution companies like an Ingram or a Reddington or similar ones, which in different businesses are different. They had like 60 warehouses, 80 warehouses. Now come to a Chroma or a Reliance who has probably 800 locations of stocking. Only difference was those 800 locations behaved exactly like how the 7 or 8 locations of Amazon from a warehousing standpoint. Mm-hmm. So I think our belief is with technology, maybe it is going to have virtual warehousing. Maybe an Ingram will run one warehouse in Mumbai, supplying to a Chroma, to a Vijay Sales, to everybody, where they don't stock, but Ingram stocks on behalf of them. It's a virtual inventory available. I think that's decentralizing, at the same time making it available for quick delivery to customers. Like if you buy an AC or a TV or even some non-essential products, I mean, I'm coming from a consumer electronics background, so I'm giving examples of them. I don't think, therefore, centralization is the only answer. And that's where I see market moving. You will probably have inventory visibility rather than inventory physical availability, because the product that you're ordering may not be an essential product that you need immediately. So that's answer to the first question on decentralization. I think, we will evolve. That's just a thought.
Yeah, yeah. Sreevathsa, just one question, in continuation of what you said. Given that many of the large companies may be adjusting their business models, and
Mhm.
hopefully they will move quickly onto some of these things as well, or they at least need to move quickly. Do you see them relying on, or do you see their willingness in them to work with early stage companies and startups, or is this going to be even more challenging for early stage companies to sell solutions to large companies?
So I think there is definitely willingness amongst almost all the top companies. I think it's just a matter of how sustainable, and I mean they have their natural fear, right? Because a lot of startups also promise a lot but end up winding up or not delivering. So I think it's about giving that confidence. But I can tell you from my experience, I mean when I started also we didn't have any background, and we have some of the largest companies still working with us, and our fear always has been when we go through a supplier evaluation or a vendor evaluation that we'll not get selected because we don't even qualify to be in the financial bracket, like, right? So typical like when you apply for a bank loan. But I think the mindsets are changing, and especially with this COVID situation, now there is no big or small company. Everybody's on the same boat, right?
Okay.
You never know, the biggest company yesterday may be winding down tomorrow. So
That's a good perspective. It's leveled the playing field for everyone, and everybody has an equal opportunity to do that.
correct.
And
So
we are also hearing from when we talk to large corporate, we are also hearing their need to engage, or at least their willingness now, or openness to engage with startups and early stage companies. So I think that represents a thing.
correct. And I can tell you from my experience of working for some of the companies and now on the opposite side as a partner, I think at leadership, one of the key discussions is also because as you grow and become a large company, some of the things take time. They
Sure.
also look at startups to really hustle, huddle, and bring the solutions that they want to do it themselves quicker. So I think the answer is yes, openness does exist.
Wonderful, wonderful. That sets the context for various things. Suman, moving to you, industrials and some of these large companies, enterprise companies and stuff. What are you hearing when you talk to companies, especially the ones who are global in nature, multinational and stuff? What adjustments do you think they are likely to make in their businesses that will have relevance for supply chain and logistics companies here? Especially the kind of startups that you see, which are essentially, a lot of them are building software to optimize some of these supply chains. Suman? Suman, you're on mute. Suman, you're on mute.
Sorry. I'm just kind of reflecting because I'm kind of seeing multiple pictures emerging in various parts of the world, and it's difficult to say what will finally fan out, or if there is only one thing that will fan out. Maybe not. So I'll try to put a few things in perspective. First of all, I think one thing that is common is the current situation is a great leveler. In a great leveler, not just in terms of big and small businesses and realignments of supply chains, but also a great leveler in terms of it has also exposed the unprepared underbelly of a lot of big businesses. With all the scenario plannings and the risk plannings that companies have done over the years, it clearly shows how one-sided many of it was. And I would say that if there is one thing, and I may sound very contrary because I'm in a forum where we are all talking and espousing technology, and I come from my 30 years plus of experience in technology, is also exposing, like what Ashutosh said, the Kirana store is going on. It's exposing the fact that a very, very fine-tuned, very optimized operational research, algorithm-based, AI algorithm-based supply chain solution, tech solution is not working. Nowhere it's working. It's not working in Europe. It's not working in Singapore. It's not working anywhere. What is working is a lot of physical aided with technology. So I think the new normal that we will emerge, and possibly there's only one prediction that I can see is this whole concept of physical and digital empowering physical in a big, large way, with the big spotlights shining on the physical part is going to be the new normal. That's number one. The rest, the trends that I see is, for example, yes, I think, from the perspectives of the manufacturers that I see, I think a lot of the manufacturing will shift close to point of demand. Now, how is that possible? That means much more modular and system-driven designs. Today, electronics industry is only place where we really think about system design. Automotive has talked about it, but really hasn't delivered. That's the reason why they're in such deep red and everywhere in the world. Airlines haven't. Aerospace industry hasn't really, excepting parts of the components which are very systems driven, which are more electronics. But the systems driven product design, systems driven product, and therefore what we will see is a lot of aggregation of dual use technologies will happen and emerge. So for example, when you see an automotive company going and manufacturing ventilator, that will be the new normal. So you will come down to saying, from saying a standpoint of, oh, I'm an automotive company, I manufacture automotives, to saying, I'm a company which can beat sheet metal, which efficiently and effectively. I'm a company which knows how to manage cash balances effectively and efficiently, or I'm a company which knows how to manage varied kind of labor forces and bring them in through a disciplined way and get inputs and outputs and the stations. And I'm a deep welding company. I think those are the fundamentals that will emerge, rather than saying I'm an automotive company or I'm a refrigerator company, because the shift of the volume will be so significant at this points of time, and it will keep on shifting so significantly that it will be very difficult for companies to keep a stake. For example, will tomorrow's a big electronics company be a phone maker or make electronics based medical sensing devices that can go now and use some of the technologies, like for example visual technologies or transmission technologies and etc. So I think that's definitely happening, and as I talk to companies in the Far East or talking to companies in some of the other parts of the world, I see that's a very big conversation, that how we can break down our products and our services into lowest common denominators and find dual uses that we can quickly put together as a Rubik cube for various different markets close to the consumer consumption point of delivery manufacturing.
That's a big one, right? Because that fundamentally changes the nature of industries and the sectors and segments in the way they were traditionally defined. Also, what that means is, because even large companies will perhaps need to be nimble, their current model of working where they're deeply integrated with one particular supply chain will probably they'll need to probably step back and be nimble enough to plug into any opportunity that comes along. Like you talked about, automobile company saying that, look, I know how to manufacture large equipment, and therefore what are the business opportunities that emerge as a result of my competencies around what I make, and therefore their ability to be able to integrate into or plug into different kinds of supply chains and distribution chains. So is that something that you see happening?
Absolutely. In fact, what I'm also seeing happening is, for example, a lot of products which still had life in them, and they were yellow products, they were going into the landfill because buying a replacement was sometimes cheaper. All it needed was maybe a little bit of electrification, intelligence built up into the product. Especially if you see, for example, huge number of yellow products exist in large manufacturing and construction machinery industry, mining, construction machinery, etc. across the world. All of them now working at a very suboptimal level. You will have these. So if you are a manufacturer of, say, a big construction machine, where would your new product go and sell? So I think there's a lot of focus that will also come into repurposing, refurnishing, taking back a product, putting back, say, an IoT device, understanding how the product can be used, repurposing that product for a different life cycle of usage will start happening. I think refurbishing business for a manufacturer will really be, if a manufacturer is not thinking about it, I think that they're in their own perils.
Sure. So let's assume, say, for example, manufacturers and large companies are thinking about it, or will, with conversations around this, hopefully at some stage they will start moving towards that. But large companies typically will take time to move in, and therefore there will be an interim period of business as usual that they will need to do. And there will be some period of transition that things will happen where things are changing. as a young entrepreneur, and typically you've been very involved in the supply chain labs, and you've seen the kind of companies that we have, which are part of the portfolio, which are creating software solutions that optimize some of these things. How should entrepreneurs be thinking about when they engage with large customers? Should they be talking about, I can come and fix this for you right now? Or they be talking about, here's something that I can do as you move along? How do
So
they?
I think the biggest benefit that, because many of these entrepreneurs are actually very seasoned professionals themselves.
Right.
Especially with the supply chain labs, the kind of people that we have seen, there are deep understanding of knowledge of domains and etc. that's out over there. Going and helping sorry for using some of these words, but I'm just trying to make a point. A large company which is suffering from inertia and therefore is a little lethargic, but they know that they have to think out of the problem and do situation analysis. Going and instead of trying to say, here is my cookie and here is how we cut the cookie, going and saying that, let us think through your solution. I, as a small company, have the advantage of inertia on the other side. I will quickly do prototypes of the various things that we are talking about. As we speak, we are prototyping. Tomorrow, I'll be up over here working with 5 prototypes that you can take a look. You can put all the five prototypes, just like, for example, the way the vaccine world is happening. People are now not saying, this is one vaccine that I'm betting on, which was okay in the normal time. Now they're saying, we are betting on 6 vaccines. Maybe there'll be wastage, but we will fail fast. That fail fast mantra of a small company, if you can bring it as a part of a service, a thinking service, or I don't want to use the word consulting, because you're both the thinker and the prototyper with the large company. I think you will find very big takers from the large companies, because what large companies need now is the nimble hands of these entrepreneurs rather than staid old hands of the so-called big consulting companies.
That indeed is good to hear, and that's a message that I think we all collectively have today across large companies as well as entrepreneurs. Thank you for that. Girish, you're somebody who's got a very good ringside view of different sectors, including lots of companies where some of them serving large customers, some of them doing consumer products. What's the broad sense do you get from what you hear from the market? Do we now have some insights on to draw a reasonably clearer picture, or is it still time to wait and watch and the world can sort of move in either direction? We don't know yet.
Yeah, so I think the biggest difference between what we are seeing now and what we have seen earlier, as part of our growing up, multiple recessions, multiple slowdowns, etc., is the fact that this is cross spectrum. And even today, after struggling with this for more than 12 weeks now across the globe, we still don't know how deep this is going to be and how long this will last. So that's and as Ashutosh said, a vaccine is anywhere between 18 to 24 months away, at least, if not more, and therefore there is going to be a paradigm shift in the way we live, the way we do business, the way we operate, going forward till such time we get to a stage where either herd immunity is built out or a vaccine is found. So in such a dynamic situation, it is very difficult to plan for the future. So what we've done internally is that we've basically gone back to the portfolio and said, please relook your plans afresh. This is a good opportunity to go and look at this whiteboard again and see where you are headed. Just by saying that I will cut expenses by 50%, my revenue will go down by 70%, I will increase my runway by 3 months, is not going to solve for it, because the way people are going to buy products, services is going to completely change. So if you are in the need to have category, you have a chance to come out on the other end of the tunnel on your 2 legs. But if you are in a good to have category, then God bless you. And that is a fundamental shift in how startups and businesses work and have been working in this entire over the last 8-10 years when money was cheaply available. So that's a very, very fundamental shift. And therefore, if you are not using this opportunity to go back and rejig your plan and rejig your go-to-market strategy, rejig the customers you want to go after, rejig the technology roadmap that you are working on, then you wasted this opportunity. And therefore, this is the time to put on your thinking caps. This is the time to, get your models in place for the new post-COVID world as it will emerge, which will be a much more contactless, much more, distanced, much more, much less travel, much less face-to-face. And therefore, if you're in any of those models where you are actually in the face of the customer 24/7, then you need to seriously step back and think of how this model will emerge for you.
And Girish, given that you are advising several companies from a portfolio and outside as well, is there a framework or best practices that you sort of suggest where people can do, one, to assess the kind of impact, and secondly to sort of plan their pivot going forward? Also,
Sure.
related question to that is because a lot of time, one of the characteristics of entrepreneurs, and rightly so, is the optimism and the conviction they have in whatever that they're doing. And therefore, at this point of time, is there more merit in getting outside voices, either peers or others, in the thinking to play devil's advocate more than ever?
Sure. So we've devised an internal framework where we've basically looked at companies on a 2x2 matrix, impact that COVID has on them and the vulnerability that they are in. Vulnerability essentially means what is their current cash burn and where they are headed with respect to the kind of runway they have on the balance sheet. And depending on what quadrant they have fallen, we've basically gone back to them with specific inputs with respect to the way to manage their cost, the way to manage their employee strength, the way to manage their revenues, etc. And if you haven't done it till now, then it's a good time to start doing it, because the internal feeling has been that the more you extend your runway now, the better it is for you. And therefore, if things improve, so you hope for the best, but you plan for the worst, right? So you plan for the worst now, and if things improve as time passes, you can always ratchet back. You can always go back to the same old salaries. You can always go back to the same old expenses. But every expense that you do has to be looked with that lens of whether it is essential and necessary, or whether it is something that can be deferred, for a few weeks, months, quarters. And as I said, we don't know whether it will be a few weeks, months, or quarters, and therefore that it's a good yardstick from an actionability perspective to look everything with that lens.
Sure. And when people are making their plans going forward from here, should they be more definitive as plans, or should they be in terms of multiple scenarios, in terms of figuring out how they will go along? I think most certainly in the short term it'll be multiple scenarios, but what do you think about the mid and the long term? Should they be thinking about
I think band-aiding of plans does not work in a scenario like this. So as I said, it cannot be a plan with 50.
what does not work?
Band-aiding of plans. So you need to actually go back to the drawing board and say, the world is changed. The faster you come to that reality, the better it is for you. Okay. And therefore, if the world is changed with in terms of your opportunity, how has it changed? And therefore, what kind of customer behavior is expected going forward, is how you will go back and rejig your business model, and rejig your go-to-market strategy, and rejig your sales strategy. And therefore a lot of stuff will start to happen. On a lighter note, I was somebody had sent a WhatsApp message saying, who leads digital transformation in your company, the CEO, or the COVID-19? So that's exactly what is. The world is changing, or has already changed, and therefore digital is going to be the new way of life. And if you are still dependent on a feet on street model, an in the face selling model, a high touch model from a customer service delivery, then God bless you. But you have to, therefore, as an entrepreneur, as a company, step back and figure out how things will evolve with the post-COVID world, and how do you quickly adapt for that. Okay, and if it means that you need to go and engage with external consultants, external folks who have who've seen some of this stuff, then by all means do it. Every entrepreneur today has an advisory board, a mentor board, etc. Please utilize them. Please leverage them, because an outside in perspective in a scenario like this always helps. You might take only 50% of what they have to offer, or 20% of what they have to offer, but please remove the blinkers that you were working with in a pre-COVID world, because this is not the time to continue to work exactly the same way as you were working earlier. It will not work.
Got it. Sreevathsa, before I go on to Ashutosh, I just want to check if there is any, Girish provided a framework that they use for their internal assessment of their portfolios. Because you work with several other companies, are you seeing any other frameworks that might be useful for entrepreneurs as they think through what to do and what impact, etc.?
Sure. So I think there is no one answer that fits all, but I think what stands common is definitely, again, basics, right? What you're good at, which is structural advantages that you carry. There is no real, I think it's what you have as structural advantage rather than competitive advantage. So if you're good at certain things, like Suman was mentioning, it's not about, I make aircraft engines. I can make anything if I'm good at producing something that serves a larger use case. So I think certainly going back to what you're good at. Second, in continuation to what Girish said, you will get all kind of outside perspective, but I think, again, choose the right one. Investors included, I can tell you 80% of probably venture capitalist fund today also has people who have never seen any recession before. So a lot of the, other than probably at partner level, the analysts give you inputs all the time they have never done before, right? Theory doesn't work. What works is practical experience. So with due respect, I think it's going back to what you're good at. It's not a popularity contest any longer. If you have to, take few decisions as an entrepreneur, as a founder, I'm assuming we have a lot of founders here. I think it's about doing the right thing, what is good for you, and therefore a lot of things that you have not done in the past. So I will still go back to work on your strengths. What's your structural advantage? And I'll give an example of a company like you were mentioning, right? Quite ago, that House Joy was into home furnishing, is now supplying groceries because some of the big companies didn't step up. Similarly, Apple has been doing this for ages. They were a computer company, got into mobile phones. Mobile phones, they said, is going to reach kind of a saturation, and health is a new world. They got into Apple Watch, which today they are the largest watch manufacturer in the world, right? Omegas of the world, Citizens of the world, all those big companies. I mean, can you think of any other company making a watch? Because that's their structural advantage. When they do good things, they do it well. So people know that we can try. I think if you have some structural advantages, I think it's time to really work on them.
Sure. Thanks.
Can I add one more thing here, Rajat?
Of course, Girish, please.
Yeah. So I think the other fundamental change that will happen, and that we are seeing happening, is that the way you manage your business, the KPIs you track, has evolved. Okay. So suddenly vanity metrics is out of the window, and therefore what matters is essentially what value are you bringing to the table from your customer's perspective, and why should the customer stick back to you again and again and again. So if you've been tracking your business model using metrics which were more ego boosters than real value on the table, it's time to give it a hard relook.
Wonderful. Thanks. Good words of advice.
Rajat, I want to just Rajat, can you hear me?
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Suman.
Yeah. So a couple of on the model. Maybe I don't know whether we will have time to later discuss model, but if you have, then I'll defer the answer. But we are seeing some of the models emerging, and some of them are very thought-provoking models. It might be good to look at them.
Wonderful. Do you want to just summarize something very quickly, or is there something that we've also?
Very quickly, if I say, and of course, there is no generalization on this, but very quickly is that there is a sense of urgency that has to be brought in, like which Girish said. This going back to the drawing board. living through the current crisis, and you don't know how long the crisis is going to be, weeks, months, quarters, etc. But if you think about it, it's like as if you're sprinting. But if you don't know whether you're sprinting for 100 meters or 200 meters or 400 meters or 2 kilometers, you may actually burn yourself out. So you have to assume that this is going to be a relay race. So the one way of looking at the relay race is bring down the complexity of your business down to a simple hop. There is an input, there is a process, there is an output. If you can think down to that level, that this is input, this is output, this is process, and then validate it through a fine comb, assign people responsibilities with a little bit of an overlap between this one output to the other input, that allows that baton to be passed on the relay race. We are seeing far more effectivity coming in than giving a team a large part of a task and expecting them to do, and then finally sitting through reviews, realizing nothing really has moved because everybody has a valid reason why things haven't moved. On the other hand, you must have an organization with that big faith that this will pass and you will live for. Many organizations and economies have collapsed post a crisis. So while this team is working on, there have to be an organization that is looking at scenarios on post-crisis, and that's like running a marathon. So you're learning with a very different energy levels.
Absolutely. I think, that summarizes the whole thing about saying that this is not business as usual, and large companies need to think like startups, and startups need to have some mechanism to be able to really break down into process thinking and stuff like that. That typically was a domain of large companies. I'll come back to that if we have time at the end.
Project, one point here that I want to make, okay, that Suman said, and therefore it is important within the organization to clearly articulate who's running business as usual, trying to keep the lights on, and who's trying to essentially figure out what is going to be the next scenario that is going to emerge. And normally we've seen one person cannot manage that complexity and the mind power it takes to think through some of the stuff.
No, absolutely. And Girish, that's one of the advice that we've given our portfolio companies at Supply Chain Labs, is that especially where there are 2 or 3 founders, for one of them to really take on the ownership of managing the the transition to whatever that needs to be. And while everybody got participated, it's still one person's responsibility.
Absolutely.
But quickly moving on to, the how part as well. Ashutosh, there are 2 kinds of impacts that companies may have. There are some companies where they will need to make minor or major adjustments into their plans. And there will be yet another set of companies whose plans will need to completely go into a different direction. And to you, I'm requesting to elaborate a little in terms of, for companies that have to really rethink who they are and what they do and for what kind of customer, are there any best practices or insights from your experience that you can say that these are the nice things to do and these are not the kind of things to do when you're doing a complete rejig?
Thank you, Pradeep. So let me give you some thoughts on given the scenario that has just been discussed and all the facts that all the panelists have spoken, that there's no real certainty on where we are heading. I think a very lovely word that startups have been using for the last few years is pivoting, and I think it's time for us to start thinking that pivoting is now an essential part of our business. We need to keep thinking all the time, and we do not necessarily need to get emotionally involved with our existing business. Second thing is that funding is going to get increasingly challenging. Girish is sitting with us here, and I'm sure he can elaborate much more. But I don't see investors opening up their checkbook so easily. Supply chain we've already spoken about. I would add one more very interesting dimension, and I think that if our business is dependent to a large extent on products coming out of China, think quickly. In the short term, there will be a reaction that will come, and consumers will get conscious of products that are getting Chinese products. We've got to be absolutely certain that one size does not fit all. We've got to get much more granular. And another point that I've often spoken about is that in today's times, if you have the luxury of deep pockets, if you have a luxury of a lot of cash, be ready to make an attractive acquisition. So I think these are all things that we have to be looking out for And at the same time, as Suman has also spoken about, Girish has spoken about, Sri has spoken about, we have to keep on taking a realistic view of our own starting position. Where are we today? We have to start demanding very, very specific and measurable accountability from every one of the people who we are working with, including ourselves. We have to develop multiple scenarios. What is my value proposition? What are my key disruptors in the business? How are my competitors making a change in this new normal? Uh, you know, who are my stakeholders, and are they willing to carry on with me? Do they keep trusting me? We just have to keep on rethinking every single day. We have to brainstorm every single day. These are completely uncertain times. Nobody knows where we are heading. I'm sincerely hoping that the new normal will be as close to status quo ante, but my gut feel tells me that we're going to have some very, very major changes that will take place.
I think it's one, question that, and typically we see entrepreneurs struggling with that, saying that, I know that I have to go to this new direction. I'm clear about where we need to, and let's assume that they've got where they need to go right. But it's very hard always for entrepreneurs to give up what they currently have and say, this is gone. I mean, I don't want to do it. It gets me cash flow. But those were at that time. In these circumstances, what is a prudent strategy to really cut off and say, okay, I know this is getting cash, but it's distraction. I want to get rid of it and I want to focus on this. Or is it in these times better to keep getting the cash, whatever it is, and yet figure out a way of moving in the other direction?
So, I've been an entrepreneur, done a couple of startups, working on more now. I think the biggest challenge an entrepreneur faces is how to give up something. And second is how not to see an opportunity in everything. I think these are two very, very major challenges that every entrepreneur faces. I think in the new normal that we are talking about and that we are beginning to see, and believe me, I think the economic impact of the last 5 weeks is not even being understood right now. It's going to be a very, very hard world. I think what entrepreneurs need to do is to sit down, and a question that I ask in my coaching with the people I coach is, I always say that on a scale of 1 to 10, tell me, where do you think your business is going to be, say, 3 months from now, 6 months? On a scale of 1 to 10, tell me how important or relevant is your top management team in terms of being able to deliver the new normal, right? And if your answers are not at your 8 and 9, I think you need to start sitting back and saying, hey, listen, I need to do something quick. Otherwise, I'm going to be burning up all my savings and whatever reserves I have.
Right. Ajay, can I just add something here?
Yes, please, of course, Girish.
I think the other fundamental shift that entrepreneurs need to be cognizant of is the fact that their competitive landscape has completely changed. Okay, because the guy who was your competition yesterday might not necessarily be your competition tomorrow as you emerge in the new world. Okay, so I'll give you an example. We are invested in a company which does virtual reality rendition for architects and interior designers. So they were competing with the likes of AutoCADs, etc., etc. But suddenly, in the post-COVID world, they have a very interesting collaboration layer on top of it that they've created. So suddenly, they are not competing with the design companies or the AutoCAD companies, but they are competing with the collaboration companies. So suddenly, the entire competitive landscape has changed, because the guy who you were working with yesterday as a as a compatriot is now your competition, and the guys who were your true competition are no longer your competition. So that is the fundamental shift that is required in the thinking at an entrepreneur level for you to be able to appreciate what's happening in your space.
No, appreciate it. Yeah, absolutely. In continuing with that, Sreevathsa, concepts like business continuity planning and stuff like that were really the realm of larger companies with larger divisions and stuff like that. When early stage companies, startups, and sort of companies that are 1, 2, 3 years in their existence may not have very mature processes even now. Do these concepts become more relevant for them in the context of what has happened? And if so, what are some of the things that they should put into place to ensure business continuity to take care of any impacts like these?
With due respect, I think situation like this was never anticipated, right? So many of the earlier ways of thinking BCP or business continuity planning, I think also failed in many cases, right? Like you get, Ashutosh gave the example of some of the large e-commerce companies had all the might and all the processes, but it failed. They failed to deliver. So I think the BCP again is extremely important, but has to be practical. And I'll give a very practical example. If you look at planning and forecasting, and from the supply chain world, which is inventory planning, and let's say one of the aspects of that, our mothers were the best planners in the world. And think of all our mothers, they knew what is ABC class of inventory. They will always get milk every day, but they will get rice once in a month, right? They knew what was high value, low value inventory. They knew when, seasonal inventory, mangoes were always brought in the first time they were available. So I think it's all about going back and seeing, hey, I need to be prepared, and therefore what's good for me. The traditional BCP, for example, you always had this, you have your servers, backup servers in Texas, because that's the least accident prone, or some of the earthquake prone markets or regions. But COVID has gone everywhere, right? So I think it's going back to what's practical. Certainly BCP is important. You need to be, whatever the size is. Yes, large companies have the luxury of doing it better. But I think even every single small company, including the Kirana store, right? Today, if you see social distancing, and he's also telling his own so-called, popular or loyal customers, sir, 2 घंटे आज चलेगा, आपको नहीं चलेगा, उससे ज़्यादा माल नहीं मिलेगा, right? So he's planning himself. So I think the traditional BCP of the way of thinking versus the practical BCP, in my view, is you have to continuously evolve what's good for your business. Sorry.
Sorry, we're getting cut between, but I'm saying that would it be fair to say that even the large companies will now figure out how to become nimble and how to make their process a lot more flexible, and therefore business continuity even for startups needs to factor in some of those aspects?
Absolutely. I think absolutely. Like, all the panelists said, there is no set way of doing things. I mean, if you look at the business to actual execution funnel, let's say cashback was the way to change user behavior. COVID changed all the user behavior. Like my mom is today, 82-year-old, she's online. She would, even if the TV's volume is low, she would call me to say that volume nahi hai, kaise badhana hai? Yeah, some very random small little things. But today, I think therefore cashbacks, if you think that your user behavior changing strategy is by giving it incentives, think of it again. There is no cashback required now to really get anyone to buy anything, right? If it is essential. So I think therefore startups will have, because startups carry one of the greatest advantages of nimbleness, able to pivot if the founder is not egoistic or the team is not egoistic. But I think I will come to a little different part of the equation. I think it's also time to really build a culture at organization level, including your star developers, star managers, like Ashutosh said very clearly. Go on a drawing board to see who's on a 1 to 10 scale. If somebody is 8 on development skills but not really flexible, I don't think he's the right guy for you any longer. So I think certainly there are opportunities where we have already seen large companies the way we work with, and I think partnerships are getting stronger if you're flexible, and large companies we've seen being extremely flexible. And I'm talking about the size of Apple or a Samsung or an Amazon, which are becoming flexible. And I can tell you, because they're also in the same phase, right? They want to go through every single opportunity to conserve cash or make money, and they are being open to all ideas. So I think there'll be a new normal.
Sreevathsa, what I'm hearing from you as well as some of the other panelists is that the value propositions that the same product may have offered and the way you pitched that product to customers earlier may need to change, even though the product may not, because that is the kind of messaging that companies might be more willing to hear. Interesting conversation, and I think that sets the context for another topic at some stage as well. But Suman, coming to you, given the way businesses are engaging and the whole digital selling experience and stuff like that, companies that are selling to enterprise customers and onboarding them literally, sort of most of the selling was meant to be, or at least the earlier way of selling to customers was feet on street, account management, and then, sort of going there and doing the integration and stuff like that. Even if the core product does not change and the models don't change, is there a rethink that companies have to do on their internal selling processes and the customer onboarding processes? And if that is so, I mean, because that is one area where when we talk to startups, we don't see them putting that much emphasis on some of these core aspects.
Project, again, it's very easy to say with the 5 weeks of hindsight that, oh yeah, it's all changing. People will all do, Zoom call based conferences, etc. But let me tell you, last week, there are two fairly large size companies that I advise in Europe. The CEO of the company was taking a car and driving over from one country to another country to go and meet a customer. I do not believe, and I can, it is maybe my experience of seeing through how a complex, large enterprise deal is crafted, that it can all go into online CRM and calls like this and eventually do it. There will be, yes, there will be more use of online. There will be more for every small discussion. You may not have to rush down or take on a plane on a flight and go and do a half an hour meeting, 1 hour meeting. But you will now plan maybe a better, longer, more succinct meeting to do things. And I think that is the phygital part, which I say. I do not believe, in fact, if there is one thing that I'm again going to harp back and say is, there are, like Sreevathsa talked about his mother, the mother's way of managing inventory. Find out those physical strengths that you had, which you have given up because it was no more fashionable. So you kind of transformed your company to a digital company. Find out those strengths, reinvest back in those strengths, because for all you know, they may become very, very handy.
Good point. Good point. So I think what you're saying is be judicious. Don't don't swing the pendulum one extreme to another.
Other thing that I just want to say is, irrespective of which way you look at the total available market, large companies, we do this continuously. We look on like a religion every year. We look at our TAM. There is always the best of the companies and the best of the industries. There's still about 20 to 25% of the market that remains unserved. It is unserved because either we didn't have the price point or we didn't have the incentive to go and create a product in that price point. If you start simplifying your product, if you start bringing in frugality in your process, if you start leveraging some of the things that your traditional competitors are doing, now you plan to do together with them. If you can find that last feet on the street, which is far more frugal than maybe your digital large plant outreach, you will be able to go and address those markets. So I think I'm seeing extreme, like for example, Africa. Africa today suddenly is becoming the big land of opportunity for most of the European companies. So opportunities are there. It may be the top part of the opportunity is getting curbed. Those big visible customers who wrote those $1 million checks, they're going away. So that can maybe seemingly the fall of the market. But please look down and see that huge amount of unserved market for every business, which earlier was not fashionable or not in the right price point curve, but which is now available because of the change and shift of the models.
Absolutely, I agree, sir. One last question for Girish before we open up the floor for question and answers. Questions. There is one question already coming, but I'll take that later. Girish, pivoting, rejig, rethinking, reassessing what you need to do, all that is fine. But many of these things are going to require some amount of capital. What conversations should entrepreneurs do with investors like yourself and others to be able to get a better chance of finding capital? And if the typical VC world is not going to, or at least going to be doing a wait and watch, what other alternate ways would you recommend to entrepreneurs to go and fund some of these things that they would require?
Okay, so I think funding is not going to be easy. As you said, the VC world is kind of stepping back and trying to gauge the impact on their current portfolio, etc. Having said that, the lights are still on at Yournest. We are actually coming up with a program shortly to do a virtual, online deal flow selection program. Okay, So we are happy to look at opportunities, where there is a certain amount of investment thesis fitment, etc., for us to look at from an investment perspective. But coming back to the question around, pivot and how do you fund it? Now, at this point in time, expecting a new investor to come in and fund your, pivot strategy is not going to happen, because it takes time to get to a stage where you have a comfort in offering a term sheet, writing a check, etc. But your existing investors should be your port of call. They also realize they also are struggling with exactly the same problem of seeing the mortality on their portfolios, etc. And they are more open to write checks, in case you're running out of runway, and it's easier for them to do because they know the opportunity. And if there is a pivot that you're planning and you're already working on an MVP which is already there, you kind of tested it with a few of your marquee existing customers, and there's been a decent conversations happening about taking those up in the new emerging scenario, then those funding discussions can become quicker, faster, and easier. But expecting new people on the cap table at this point in time is slightly unrealistic, and therefore your fallback is either the reserves that you have or your existing investors.
Thank you. Good to hear that as well. Folks, we will now open the floor for questions. And I think there was...
Project, if I may, I think
yes,
we spoke about strategy and a lot of the business stuff. I think one topic also which is extremely important, especially for founders in startups, is also to, I think, keep engaging with the team. And I can tell you, running a 400 plus member team with an average age of 25, 26, people are not used to sitting at home, especially, they have their own lifestyle now. Suddenly they are with their parents and can't even go out, including for taking a smoke break maybe, right? So I think there is a lot of, people are getting frustrated. I think it's very important, therefore, also to keep that channel of communication very, very transparent, very, over communicate probably, and keep the team engaged, because when you come out of this, you need your best team to perform better at their best again. I think it's also important, therefore, to have that as a founder, in my view. Just my 2 cents.
No, very valid input. Very, very valid. And I think, the whole concept of helping people deal with stress, the emotional, sort of turmoil, etc., is an important component of that. Very relevant point. I think there is, Ashutosh, I think there were a couple of people who had reached out to you as well. And I think Shiraz, who's on this call,
yes,
had one question as well. Shiraz, hi, good to have you around in the call as well, boss.
So Shiraz, I am unmuting you. Please go ahead.
Can you guys hear me?
Very clearly, Shiraz.
How's everybody doing? And thank you to all the panelists and Project for doing such a great job moderating. So my question is, taking a few steps back, a little bit more general business. We're all striving to excel in our business and striving to increase our efficiency and deal with these challenges. We're not living in silos. So can the esteemed panelists give us some guidance and some tips on how we can deal with companies or people or external influences who are completely dhila and just not interested to excel and strive and achieve the same way we are?
Shiraz, do you want this question to be directed at anybody in particular?
Project, you can choose, or, I think if one of the panelists would like to step up and take it, that's fine. No particular person, but just generally.
Gentlemen, anybody that would like to?
Okay, so Project, let me try and answer. Shiraz, thank you for the question. If I understand it correctly, what you're saying is that if there are some colleagues or some people you deal with who are, in your words, dhila, how do you deal with them in today's times? Am I correct?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. And,
Okay.
We all have our own strategy, but I think for some of the younger founders and entrepreneurs who may not have seen these challenging times, behaviors get extremified, as I like to
Correct.
call it.
Correct. So, I think it's a very, very pertinent question. I have been dealing with a couple of young founders, and I find their biggest challenge is to actually recognize that this is a problem that is confronting the whole world. And in a very, very typical ostrich style, they've put their hand into the sand and said this problem is going to pass away in very, very quickly. Some of them, I think, are going to be in for a rude shock when they suddenly find that their resources have dried up and the businesses have dried up. But having said that, I think most founders, most stakeholders, most employees are beginning to recognize that there are going to be some serious changes. I'm a part of the YPO for many years, and I've been seeing on our YPO chat groups, everybody's talking of cutting back salaries. Everybody's talking of seeking much greater accountability. Everyone's talking about, no more promotions this year, no more bonuses this year. This is a harsh and a hard reality that is going to hit each one of us sooner than later. And if we still continue to live in what I would call la la land and saying that, nothing's going to happen to me and I can continue to do things, then I think I will be the loser if I don't recognize it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ashutosh. There's one more question from Pratik Chaudhary. And Sreevathsa, I'm going to request you to respond to that because you might be, bit more experienced in this. Interesting question is saying that are large companies going to move from mass production of goods to production for the masses? Or what I think is asking is this likely to lead to more customized production rather than mass production, where goods were shipped from one particular design or location to everybody else across the world?
I think if I understand the question correctly, I think it's talking about reducing dependency from a single location. I think, again, similar to China.
Does that lead to more mass customized products rather than one product being sent across to every part of the world? I mean, say, for example, would mobile phone manufacturers or television manufacturers allow customers to sort of customize the product in some form or fashion rather than having made it in one particular location?
Yeah, answer is yes. But again, it may change by the product category, certainly. At uncertain times, one of the first strategy to do is always remove complexities, right? So if customizations are going to become complex, then probably people may not. But if it is simpler, where you're just able to provide more options, but it is part of one big basket, I think the answers would be yes. So, for example, I am a frequent flyer. I travel across the world. So I have almost all travel where I have, membership. Now, I'll give you an example of Lufthansa. I'm a frequent flyer on Lufthansa. They give me benefits like Wall Street Journal, Netflix. I have all of them. So I think it's also time to therefore see what is part of your package and make it specific to the customer. So I think it will be more demand driven rather than always thought as let's have a standard set which goes to everybody. So answer is probably yes and no, but again depends on how what product line you're talking about.
Got it.
CRM, in the traditional CRM world, it's called mass customization.
Mass customization.
So you will have to customize it for every fine segment of your market for you to be able to continue to stay relevant.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just reading up some of the questions.
And I would also, therefore, again, bring back the point that I raised. I said many of these products can be repurposed for the market that today is, seemingly yesterday was unviable or was too price sensitive, etc. But these are markets which are underserved, unserved. There is a huge demand in these markets, unserved markets. And if this is maybe the next profit sanctuary, I'm much used word the bottom of the pyramid, but the bottom of the pyramid, there's a huge amount of money out over there because there is volume and there is a demand. So think about how those products can go and reach there, not necessarily value stripping the product, but by frugalizing the product through intelligent product development and service bundling customizations.
Thanks. There are a couple of questions around hiring and manpower and stuff like that. I'm going to sort of try and merge these questions and and see if we can, get an answer to a wider range of questions. One, is this whole work from home, digitally connected teams and stuff like that, what does it do to your ability to get talent, and perhaps does that expand the market to talent from wherever that is available? And given that a lot of talent may perhaps now be more available to startups than it was earlier, what would your advice be to companies in the way they structure their leadership teams particularly, and the operations team in general? And if I may request each one of you to talk through that, and Suman, if I can start with you, and then Sreevathsa, Girish, and then Ashutosh.
As much as I'm trained in the school and the thought of efficiency, I'm not a big fan of efficiency, because I think efficiency, in the name of efficiency, companies and especially CEOs of large corporations, some of them I've been part of, have cut the flesh so much that now the bones are exposed. And in these fragile times, those companies come down like pack of cards. I would, and especially if you just do an analysis of the last 15 days, the companies that have gone to the various banks asking for bailouts, you will see the names, or asking for unconditional credit lines. You will know who I'm talking about. I believe that it is effectivity, and that brings me to the point of finding the talent. Find a talent which is more effective. That means it's not that guy is, or that girl is, or that team is like out of the chart in terms of efficiency, but just works in a silo and can't do anything else. Find talents which can repurpose themselves. Find talents which are multifaceted, who are ready to understand the challenge and work with you deep as well as wide. And some of those talents may not be the most efficient talent, but the most effective talent at these points of time. Actually, it's all points of time. They are the ones that your tomorrow's company is going to rest on. They may be inside, so surface them. They may be deep down in your ranks, surface them. Therefore, the open up channels of communication right through the organization, and not just to your middle management level and to the right to the organization, but also look out in the market for people of this. And if you find such a talent, grab it. That talent is a multifaceted talent. You need all-rounders, essentially.
Good point. Thank you. Sreevathsa?
Yes, so certainly. Thanks, Suman. I think that's one of the slides in our presentations. Effectiveness scores more than efficiency. So bang on. I think, it's been an experience. Like, we are all talking about outcome, right?
Sorry, Sreevathsa, was that point relevant even earlier, or?
Yeah. It was always, I would say. In our business, I can tell you, we are not in the business of those fancy KPIs, right? Business is to make money. So I think one of the slides we always had in all our communication, including our investor deck, is, effectiveness is more important than efficiencies. So I think bang on. I think, it's absolutely more relevant today's scenario, because what matters is, you can have a bad team that can still work in a good market, but a good team also cannot work in a bad market condition, right? So I think it's all about finding what's good for the bad market, and therefore you have to be effective. So fully aligned. And I think at the same time, it's all about also building culture. Many of the entrepreneurs, especially the younger ones, I think, Ashutosh said, they're more concerned about themselves and their so-called, what if I fail? It's not by not making efforts. You make all the efforts. There are no more, kudos for writing fancy stories about why I failed, rather than how can I make it successful. I think it's time to really leave aside all the personal priorities, really make yourself a model for your teams to really also think of, I was good at this, so I will keep doing this. So there is no, I was good at it. Jugaad is a very popular Indian word. Think Jugadu. I think how to make things work is what matters, and therefore bring that culture of staying together. Let's pass this together, because nobody knows. We have been through this only 5 or 6 weeks, but it could be another 6 weeks, 8 weeks, but the markets will take time to recover. So I think it's about making people realize that if you have a flab of, today startups pay more than some of the large companies, right? I think it's a great leveler to make it practical, realize people that this is a time, there are no more opportunities outside. So let's make the best of it. And collectively, we have to make the best of it. I think that's probably, again, culture setting time for me.
Got it. Thanks. Girish?
I think, this is the time when, mature entrepreneurs will be separated from the boys. Okay. Because This is uncharted territory, but as a mature entrepreneur, you have to communicate, over communicate with your customers, with your employees. You can't be sitting in your ivory towers and saying 200 people sacked today, 50 people sacked tomorrow because we need to extend our runway. This is not the time for that. If you take your people along with you and walk them through exactly where you are and where you are headed, I can assure you that the teams also realize that these are not easy times for anybody, and therefore people are willing to walk the extra mile. And that completely depends on how culturally have you built the organization when you were in good times. Okay. And that's what will come. That's what will differentiate between companies that continue to remain relevant and be successful and scale up even in times like these, versus companies that will fall by the side. And all this is driven top down. If you don't have a CEO who has empathy, who understands the pain of his people, who understands that it is important to keep the team together, it's not going to happen. The other facet of this is there will be a lot of good talent available, as Suman said, multifaceted, etc. And if you have the runway and you are identifying clear gaps in your organization structure, please go out and use this opportunity to grab that talent with both your hands, make it worth their while to come on board, stick around, and add value. I can tell you that these guys, some of the good guys can really create value multiple times the cost that they that you incur for them on your balance sheets. So you have to be aware of some of these opportunities. You have to go, even if you want to go and hunt out for some of these people that you are been wanting to hire but have not been able to afford to do so. This is the time to do it.
Maybe I'll just add my couple of seconds in my own experience. So in fact, when we were doing replanning our COVID situation, so the first thing we said is we went back to the whole company. Of course, we have town halls every week, and the first thing that we said is, hey, we are revising our business plan with a 65% drop in our top line, and we have a target to reduce costs by 35%. And we told people we don't want to sack anyone, and that's not a action that we will take at least until next 6 months, maybe, we don't know, but because that's how the culture is built. And we asked, do you want to participate? We want to defer your salary, but you have an option to subscribe for ESOPs. 93% of our employees subscribe for ESOPs. Imagine I have cut my 35% of operating cost forever.
Fantastic.
So I think,
that also reflects, reflects the conviction that your team has in the business, right?
Correct. It makes me very emotional, but yes, I think, there is even people who joined about a month ago have responded individually saying, we understand, we don't want to even take salaries till the time the business comes back because we've not done anything. So I think it's probably your, how you set the team
fantastic. So
along with this.
And that's exactly that we've seen in the portfolio as well, wherever the entrepreneur has been emphatic, wherever he's communicated, wherever he's been open with his team, even people who were drawing 20,000 salaries have actually stepped forward and said that, we are happy to take a 25% cut. So there is camaraderie all across the organizations, because everybody knows that these are tough times, and therefore everybody is kind of willing to, tighten up their bootlaces and contribute.
Fantastic. Good to hear these stories. Ashutosh, very quick.
Okay, so just quickly, I'll say that no matter what we have said in the last 90 minutes, I do want to emphasize that this is not the end of the world. It's not as if everything is in a bad shape. It is a correction that is happening. It is what we all had some incredible expectations from our businesses, from our people, from our employers, and I think what's happening is that the whole expectation scale is now being reset. I also believe that I don't think there are anybody who's unreasonable, and that if we speak, and as Sreevathsa just mentioned, if you are willing to sit and talk to your people, and a classic example is what the central government did when they said that they're going to defer 2 installments of the dearness allowance. Now, in my memory, I don't think dearness allowance has ever been deferred for the central government, and opposition politicians have not made a big noise. So if things like governments are willing to do it, we are all in the private sector, we are all entrepreneurs, we are all in the big company. We appreciate and understand that this is not something that is happening to my business. It's not something that's happening to my country. It's happening to the entire world. So let us not, there's no doom and gloom scenario. There is a reset that is happening, and I do believe we will all come out of it, but in a very, very changed world, in a very, very changed environment.
Thank you very much to, Ashutosh, to, summarize that and end this conversation, so to say, on a very positive note. And, folks, I mean, from everywhere that we hear, we say that, look, this reset, as as we're seeing in business right now, represents an extremely opportune moment for businesses to rethink about what they need to do. Our panelists have given some inputs and insights in terms of how this entire resetting and reworking, rejigging, whatever you might call it, will need to happen. One interesting aspect is that the whole world is more receptive to, and the businesses, large businesses as well as smaller, mid-sized businesses, are receptive to newer ideas and newer opportunities and newer ways of which they can optimize their businesses, and that represents significant opportunities for early stage startups. Also, earlier funded companies had a significant advantage over companies that were struggling to raise capital. That playing field has also been leveled. If you have a good product, if you have a value proposition that makes sense to people, there will be significant opportunities that will be created for you. So with that, I'm going to end this session. Thank you everyone for participating. Thank you panelists for such wonderful insights. And I think these were very, very actionable inputs and insights that we were able to take off. For the people who are listening onto this, the Supply Chain Labs Cutting Through Chaos Forum is a platform that is designed as a support center and a peer group interaction, peer learning interaction platform for companies that are in the supply chain, logistics, and warehousing space. If you haven't already, please join the platform. There is also a WhatsApp group that has been created yesterday for a lot of conversations to flow between the participants. It'll be extremely useful. We'll all learn, we'll all learn together, and we'll all navigate ourselves through this crisis that we are in the middle of. With that, thank you very much. Have a very good day and a great evening as well. Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Have a good weekend. Bye.
Stay safe, guys. Bye.